So let me ask you guys, have you ever had trouble with patience? How about having like patience with your kids? Well, if you're anything like me, it doesn't happen naturally. As a matter of fact, I used to label myself as being the angry person. I always had this negative outlook on things. And when you see me today, it would be I'm like an entirely different person. And one of the main reasons is somebody that I've actually brought onto modern leadership here today, Larry Hagner. We're going to dive into three of the most simple, most powerful tips that you can learn about being more patient with your kids. Because here's the thing, if we don't take this seriously, you know what happens, right? We start creating disconnection. And for me, that was the opposite of what I wanted to do with my family. And when I came across the Dad Edge podcast, when I started to hear what Larry was putting out into the world, not only did I sign up for the Dad Edge Alliance, I also went into the accelerator, and I literally started to create not only the connection that I wanted to with my family, but also excel not only in my police career, but in my business, thanks to this man. So guys, welcome to Modern Leadership, where we help you see things differently. We help parents excel personally and professionally without burning themselves out and without sacrificing their family time. We do that on short videos on Mondays and Thursdays and longer episodes on the weekend. And every once in a while, we get a expert who's here. I would like to call him a parenting expert. I'm not sure if he would agree with me, but he is 1000% a parenting expert, and that is Larry Hagner. So Larry, welcome to the show, my brother.
What is going on, Mr. Mark? It's good to see you, man. It's good to see you.
It is. It is. It is. And you guys will have an idea of what I mean just in a few minutes about how instrumental these ideas, these concepts, these things help me create like literally a 180 when it has to do with my patients. And what's crazy, we'll get into this, I'm sure today, is a lot of these strategies work really, really well with your kids. But guess what? They also work with anybody else who's a human being. In reality, you could use these skills in multiple different areas in your business. When it comes to your career, being a police officer, it's not a good idea to be angry, right? But especially critical when it has to do with our family. So Larry, before we dive into these three tips, can you kind of share like a little bit about your story and how you actually came upon creating this thing called the Dad Edge?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, thank you so much for the intro. I guess I'm a parenting expert that still falls flat on my face, every day. And in some way, shape, or form, I raised four boys, 16, 15, 9, and 6. I've been married to my wife now. This will be the 20th year. I've known her for 26 years, ever since college. Grew up in a fatherless environment for half my childhood. The other half, I grew up with usually a revolving door of whoever my mom was either married to or dating at the time, of just usually a toxic father figure. Sometimes they'd stay a day or two. Sometimes they'd stay a week. Sometimes it was a couple of years, just depending on what was going on in my mom's life and who the guy was and what the scenario was. I didn't even know my biological father growing up. I actually met my biological father by sort of accident once when I was 12. That relationship lasted about 6 months. We parted ways after that again. That was definitely hard. He was remarried at the time. He had a 2-year-old son that went on the way. I think me coming back into his life after 12 years was a bit too much for him to handle at the time, and we parted ways, unfortunately. And that really kind of sent me on a spiral as a kid. You've battled with weight, Mark. I battled with weight growing up. I kind of gave up on life at that age at 12. If I'm being real honest, I failed the 8th grade. I actually did 8th grade twice. Which was actually a blessing in disguise, because I think that was really a turning point for me. I really kind of grew up, went to high school, went to college, lived a normal life, had a very successful, lucrative career in the medical device industry, and married, first kid on the way, and I'm in a Starbucks, and who comes walking in for morning coffee with my father. Hadn't seen him in 18 years. And we reconnected at that point. And, I think as adults, you have a decision to make. You can either make a decision to not forgive and hold a grudge and be angry for your whole life and be a victim, or you can say, hey, things happened, I'm not happy about it, but what can we co-create together? And that's what we've done. That's what I've done with my dad. And we've got a good relationship. But I can tell you, being a father and a husband, it did not come easy. I always, it's kind of funny, on my podcast, I always refer to the police academy, as this beautiful training ground for a police officer. You don't show up to the police academy, on day one and they say, oh, hey, we don't have a police academy anymore. You're actually, Mark, you're going to head down to precinct number 2. They're going to put you in a car. Here's your firearm, your uniform. You're going to go fight crime. Don't worry. You'll figure it out. Best time of your whole life. you go through, I think, almost 1,000 hours minimum, I think, of
Mhm.
training, correct?
996 actually. Yep.
996 hours of training, but we don't do that as a husband. We don't do that as fathers. It's two most important relationships we'll ever have in our entire lives. And it's the ones that we receive the least amount of training. You know, it's usually like, oh, hey, you're going to be a father today. Congratulations. Here's your firearm. Here's your squad car, and here's your uniform. You'll go out and fight crime. Best time of your whole life. You'll go out and be a dad. Best time of your whole life. And that's unfortunate. And no wonder we don't have patience. It's because we don't just quite know the right next thing. I can only imagine what it would be like if you're in a situation with a criminal or or there's trouble and you're like, holy crap, like what exactly do I do here? I don't know. But that's what we're faced with every day in marriage and parenting. It's not necessarily life threatening. It can
Mhm.
feel like it sometimes, but
Mhm.
it's not. But that's been my journey. And over the past 8 years, been doing Dad Edge, the podcast. Um, I've written 4 books. I am an imperfect, absolute, total idiot moron from time to time. It's just the only difference now is that my batting average is better. Instead of when
Mhm.
I go to the plate, I strike out 7 out of 10 times. It's more like I strike out 3 out of 10 times, but I still strike out, but I'm able to recover. I'm more aware of things and, teach men how to do these things as well.
I mean, dude, that is so freaking powerful. I think one of the things that like really connected you or connected me to you was your honesty. I remember even hearing about like the beginning of the Dad Edge when you were like
Oh,
starting to put this together and the incident that you had with your son and literally how that sparked you to get into this. And if you can, I'd like you to share that. But
yeah.
real quick, like what you were talking about these 996 hours, like in the academy. I mean, it's the same thing with like our marriage, right? They're like, oh, hey, you guys are married, go ahead and figure it out. And what was crazy, and I don't know if there's like this just weird stigma, right? It's like it's okay to go to the police academy, but it's not okay to go to the father academy, or it's not okay to go to the husband
Right.
academy, which doesn't make any sense to me. I'm like, that's way more important than this, right? And so for me, I'm like, for when I got to that point, I'm like, okay, there's somebody who knows more about this than me. How about if I find them and they help me speed up this process? And that's why I joined the Dad Edge Alliance and spent so many years in there because I'm like, they've got the answers for me. And it literally like dropped years off me trying to figure it out on my own. And I hate the fact that it's like that. That it's like, hey, it's okay to teach or train in this area, but in this area, like you can't talk about it. Like you can't. I even kind of felt like when I did that, like maybe like what are my friends going to say if like I'm now trying to become a better father. And I remember when I spun that around one day because my kids and I we were having breakfast and I'm like, hey, I got to go, I got to go upstairs, like I have my meeting. And they're like, oh, you what do you have, like you have some kind of training or something for police? I'm like, no, I'm like working on being a better dad. And I remember them looking at me like, what do you mean? Like you're a good dad. I'm like, no, buddy. Like I got to get way better for you. And I have a guy who's teaching me how to do this, who's teaching me how to get more patient, have more patient, who teaches me the how might I question, how might I, think of a different way of doing this, right? And I'm like, this is what I'm here to do. Like if I'm spending as much time on, over here in my police career, I got to really spend as much time over here when it comes to like my parenting. And I remembered like flipping that switch, and now it's okay for me to talk about it. I talk about it all the time. And I'm the same as you. I'm like, hey, you know what? I screwed this up like a couple days ago, actually. As a matter of fact, that's the reason why I'm kind of bringing it up because I like to teach things that I'm currently struggling through because it actually helps me on the other end, right? And I
Sure.
know you're the same way. So that's the reason why I really connected with you because of your openness, your honesty, and because I was willing to go, okay, this guy, he's got some stuff figured out. I need some help getting that figured out. So I appreciate you for doing that, for always being there, creating the Dad Edge and doing all this stuff because most people think I don't know if they don't know how hard it is to do all this behind the scenes. I do. And I appreciate you for that so much. But could you tell us a little bit about that beginning stages of the Dad Edge? And then we'll get into these 3 tips that you got for us.
Sure. And I'll just share with you one of my main motivators for being honest is that I have to be honest because otherwise I run the risk of, I don't pretend to know all the answers and I don't pretend to execute this flawlessly at all times. Am I pretty good at it? Yeah, I'm pretty good at it, but do I still screw up? Yeah. And that's because my kids are at the age, my oldest in particular, where he listens to my podcast episodes now. I never want to be in a situation and be like, no, you never did that, or no, this never happened, or you weren't always like this. Like I am so open. Like sometimes I almost think it's to my fault of like I was on a podcast yesterday and I had a horrible day as a father and a husband. It's like those domino effects. I know we're talking about
Yeah.
patience, which I think this is a beautiful scenario to talk about it. But I had this domino effect happen on Sunday where one thing happened and then 10 bad things happened. And I just finally got to the point where I felt like I was going to lose my freaking mind, man. And
Mhm.
like I wasn't mean to my family. I didn't, but I was short, I was crabby, and I was curt. And everybody was like, "What is wrong with you?" Ah, you know, it's like,
Mhm.
and that's when, yeah, of course, at the end of the night, I apologized, and you know, you eat humble pie, and that's it. You recover, right? But to answer your question, you know, I grew up and I was hit a lot. You know, I was yelled at a lot. I was called names, you know, like that kind of thing. And it just there was always like I just remember growing up, there was a drunken blur, like as far as parents were concerned. My mom struggled with alcohol. All the guys she dated and was married to struggled with alcohol. I can't confirm nor deny other drugs. I don't know, but I just know that there was constant absence of sobriety in
Mhm.
my upbringing. So I made a promise to myself early on. I was like, I'm not going to hit my kids in anger. I'm never going to do that. Some people are like, oh, you got to spank them for them to, you know, some people are like way against it. I was kind of like,
Mhm.
I just don't want to, I wasn't die hard against it, but I was like, I just don't want to do that. Right.
Right.
And I'll never forget my 15-year-old. He was 4 at the time. God help me now, because now he's stronger than me. He throws me around like I'm a sack of potatoes. He's a wrestler and a football player. He can literally kick my ass. But you know, he was 4 years old. I had a really bad day that day. I lost my number one customer in medical device sales, which was going to impact our income for the next 12 to 18 months. It was a kick in the nuts. You know, me and Jessica's relationship at the time, it was mediocre at best. I was kind of frustrated there. It's just overall just tension and frustration. And we were moving too, which, oh my God, add insult to injury. I hate moving more than anything. And we were packing up that day, and I was packing up all this stuff, and I was packing up all the kids' toys in their rooms and that kind of thing. And I was just kind of disgruntled, you know, as I'm packing up. And, you know, my 4-year-old comes walking downstairs, and I was just about ready to take a break for like 30 minutes. And I look at him, and I was like, hey, man, I just got done, you know, packing up all this stuff. Please don't get anything out. I'm going to take a break and come back. Well, what do you think a 4-year-old's going to do? And you
Mhm.
know, I'm an idiot. Like, come on. Like, what I thought for one reason, for one moment, he was going to do something different. He pulls everything out. I got pissed. And in a snap, I spanked him on his butt. Right. And immediately when I did it, I was like, "Ah, I don't want to do this." And I spanked him, right? And like, I didn't say that out loud, but I could feel that intuition in me, like, this is wrong. I don't want to do this. I did it anyway. It was a knee jerk reaction. Well, I hit him hard enough to where he actually fell. He actually lost his footing. And I was like, I literally looked down. I was like, oh my God, like, what did I just do? And I went to pick him up and he looked at me and kind of like shuddered. And I was like,
Mm.
oh my God. I was like, I had never spanked him, never laid a hand on him up until then. I was like, what am I doing? Like, that is exactly how I grew up. I remember being him, right?
Mhm.
Dude, I was a mess that night. I went into my office. I was emotional. That's when I started Dad Edge. And I did it through a Facebook group or a Facebook page, and it wasn't even meant for a following. I just literally, Mark, I looked at my life. I was crying. And I remember seeing that button in the left hand corner and said create a page. And because I went on Facebook to distract myself, I was like, "Ah,
Mhm.
I just don't want to think about what just happened." That button, I hit it, thing came up. So, what do you want to name your page? The Good Dad Project just literally rolled off my heart. And I started thinking about things in my life. I got a 4-year degree. I was good at medical device sales. I was good at fitness. At the time, I think I was in my seventh, eighth year of taking martial art. And I just started looking at different areas of my life. I'm like, where am I pretty decent at? Like, where do I excel at? It was in those areas, and it was all for good reason. I had training there. I had a measuring stick there. I had a coach. I had coaches there. I had mentors there, and I was constantly practicing and learning over. I was a sponge. I was a student.
Mhm.
And I started thinking, I was like, have I done this in marriage? Have I done this in parenting? I've done the opposite. Well, God, no
Mhm.
wonder I'm a mess. Like, I'm trying to figure this out blind, and I'm just keep hitting. It was almost like you're in a dark room looking for the light switch, and you just keep hitting the walls, and you're like, can someone please just? What it felt like is when I started doing this work and I started engaging mentors and coaches and masterminds and people to help me. It was almost like being in that dark room. Somebody tap you on the shoulder, be like, "Hey, man, 3 steps to the right, 2 steps
Mhm.
forward, 1 step to the left." Reach up about, 5 feet on the wall. It's right there. And that became like the most amazing feeling to have this point in the right direction and to learn these lessons along the way. I'm like, oh, wait a second. So, like, when I talk to my wife, I don't have to solve her problems. That's not really what she
Mhm.
wants. I didn't know that. Right. So, I just need to listen. I need to label her emotions. That's really all I need to do. Seriously. That will actually elevate intimacy and she'll love me more. started doing these things, oh, so like this is what patience looks like. It's actually emotional resiliency. It's just packaged up and bottled just a little bit differently. That's really what it is. Wow, I had no idea. So I can do that. And just started learning these things and implementing them and practicing them. And yes, of course, I'd fall on my face from time to time, right? Okay, well, that didn't really work the way I wanted it to. Okay, let me try this. And then you pivot, go back, learn, keep learning, keep learning. But that's really what the journey's been.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love that. And like I was telling you guys, like he has a great way of communicating through his stories. Like I'm sure that everybody who's listening to this, who heard Larry's story, can picture a time, whether they're a mom, they're a dad, they're a husband, they're whatever, like where they have like life has gotten the best of them, right? They made a
Yeah.
decision that they would want to go back, and regret maybe later in the future or in the future, but instead, like we can go back now and replay that and figure out a different way that we can do that. And that's what we're going to be diving into today. So thank you so much for sharing that, Larry. I know that a lot of people connect with it. I know one in particular, Amber here, she's an incredible mom. And always, this is just the way that it is, the way that life is, guys. We're constantly like trying to juggle all these things, and we're not going to be able to keep everything up in the air. We're going to make mistakes, and there's so much value, so much learning that is like in the mistakes. I mean, Larry pretty much told you this, and I can tell you this too. Like literally, I have a business because of what I screwed up and what I learned because I screwed up. Wasn't the things that happened first time that we succeeded at, that everything come naturally to us. No, those things sometimes I don't even know if like I just, it's an accident or if it was just pure luck. But the things that I screwed up the most, that's what people come to me and get help from. So really, you have so much opportunity in that specific situation that literally that can be the thing that you lean into the most. So Larry, let's dive into these 3 tips. Where you want to start with tip number 1?
With patience?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's debunk the very first thing. Okay. And I think this first point is really twofold, but patience is a skill. It's the same thing. Like I said, it's the same thing as emotional resiliency. If you want to be more patient, work on getting more emotionally resilient, more mentally tough, right? That's really what it boils down to. Also, I heard an expert in our group say this. He's a licensed family therapist. When we run out of patience, what's actually happened is we've run out of the skill set of what to do next, and we just don't know. So we're frustrated and we lose our patience, and all we do is like, right? I still don't. You make me so angry. Well, you actually don't. It's actually I just don't know what to do, right? That's really what it is. So rest assured that patience is not a feeling. And it doesn't determine how weak you are as a man or a parent or anything like that. You're a human being. So don't buy into the lies of like, well, I'm a mom, so I'm automatically more patient. No, your patience is going to be tested way more than humanly possible now. That's really what it is. Oh, I'm a dad, so I love my kids, so I'm going to be more patient with them. Not unless you learn it, because actually your patience is going to be tested now more than ever, right? So knowing that right off the bat, that patience is a skill. It's a skill. And the good news about skills is you can learn it. And here's the other thing too, is if you feel challenged by your level of patience or lack thereof, it's really okay. You're human. It's going to happen. It's a human condition. So, but the best way to overcome, that feeling of, I don't know what to do next, is learn what to do next, right? Set your day up for success. But that's really the first point, is I just want to reassure everybody and level set everybody. If you're losing your patience or you feel like you're going to lose your patience, it's not because you're weak. It's just because you haven't learned the skill yet. And that's okay. Here's what I'll tell you though. If you haven't learned the skill, chances are it's probably not your fault. You're just trying to repeat the patterns you were raised with, or you're trying to just do the best you can. But here's where the tough love comes. You have the opportunity to learn it. And if you continue to smack your face up against the same wall in the exact same spot over and over again, thinking something different is going to change, well, then that is your fault, because there is a different way and you can learn things differently. So it's a learning process. It's a skill that we can all learn.
I love that. I love that, man. And it's it's very much in alignment with leadership too, because a lot of people think that people are born a great leader or they're born patient.
Right.
And what we can kind of do is we can kind of like put this false label on ourselves. Like I remember having a conversation with you about somebody who had labeled themselves as like, no, I've always been angry. Like I'm the angry person.
Yes.
And we don't realize that when we're like actually putting the labels on ourselves, we will actually go out and manifest and actually show the world that we aren't a patient person. We'll show the world that we're an angry person. And it kind of like prevents you from learning this skill of patience. It's the same with leadership. It's the same with marketing. It's the same with podcasting. It's the same with speaking in public, right? It's all a skill. And yes, are there some people who are like more naturally inclined? It's within their superpowers. Yes. But at the same time, it's also a skill that you can develop. If you look at my first YouTube video, my first podcast, my first whatever, it was terrible. And I should have never done this,
Supposed to be.
Larry. I actually went back and I deleted mine. And I kicked myself
No.
so much because I'm like,
Yeah.
dude, I wish people could see. It looked like I was just like a talking mouth, like you couldn't see me. All you could see were my eyes and my mouth moving. And it was the most terrible video ever. And everybody's like, oh my God, now you
That's
speak on
good.
stages and you do all this kind of stuff. I'm like, no, you didn't see me back then, right?
Yeah.
And it was terrible back then. But that's a part of the process. It's you developing skills. So I love that you did that. You broke it down into like, this is actually a skill that you can learn.
Yeah. It's totally a skill you can learn. And by the way, anybody, who's in podcast has been, our dad edge has been out for 8 years. And anytime I have a guy that I'm either coaching, mentoring, or he joined the mastermind, I'll be like, how long have you been listening to the podcast? Like, I've been listening to you from the start. I'm like, oh, I'm really sorry about that first year. I mean, because, it's just like anything else, you don't automatically become a great podcaster or launch a successful podcast. It takes so much practice. You have to learn these skills of, of these questions and beautiful conversations and psychological safety with your guests and all those things. But yeah, patience is absolutely a skill. But here's what I'll tell you, what I've learned about patience is you can either de-escalate your level of patience all day long, or you can actually help improve it, right? And there's these pivot moments all throughout the day, especially if you're a father or a parent. I know we got some moms who are listening to this too. Let me give you an example. I personally love, I have to have a circadian rhythm with my day, and it's so important to me, right? Like, I have to get a good night's sleep. Like, I'll be honest, Mark, last night I didn't sleep very well. For some reason, I was staring at the ceiling until like 12:30 at night, like, and I got to wake up at like 5, right? And I'm just like, what is going on? But so you're off, right? A little bit that day. But going to bed, trying to go to bed at the same time. I got 4 boys. Sometimes it's hard, but I try to log in there, 6.5, minimum 7 hours of sleep a night. That's really, really important. Also, I like to get up before my kids, right? Get my mind straight. I like to read scripture. I like to journal a little bit, just get some things out. And then I love taking my kids to school. And instead of us not speaking or anything like that, me and my boys, we pray together at school. Like, that's a fantastic start to the day. What a lot of people will do is the first thing they do is when they get up is they open up this thing, right? This phone, right? And I talk about this in how we de-escalate patience and teaching it. I'm like, listen, if you want to become a more patient individual, don't touch this thing for about 45 minutes minimum after you wake up. You do that. Like, all you have to do is, let's just see, swipe right. California, back-to-back mass shootings, Mark. That's in your state.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Now, if I wake up in my first 15 seconds, I'm like, oh, yeah, it's going to be a great day. The fastest growing food retailer in America might surprise you, and deadly shootings shock Asian American communities. So there's that one too. All you have to do is swipe right on your phone, and all the bad news just comes barreling in, right? And that's not a good way, because what you're doing is you've just now agitated your amygdala, your fight or flight mechanism, and now you're aggravated. What you're triggered in some way, shape, or form, even if it's a low level frequency trigger on a scale of 1 to 10, it might hit like a 3. But guess what? You teased it, you triggered it. And that could be a cascade of things that happen. So you've got to set your mornings up for success. You got to set them up on the right foot, right? And whatever that morning routine looks like for you. But I always tell people, your level of patience or lack thereof is going to start, believe it or not, the first 3 minutes your feet hit the floor in the morning. And the things that you do and the things that you don't do will actually start that domino effect right away.
That's crazy, because like literally this morning, I went the opposite direction, where typically I'll do that. The Mr. Larry on my shoulder comes and goes, "Hey, Mark, no, go back into your routine, get your workout in, get your nutrition shake in, do those things like your personal development and your growth, listen to a podcast, and then come back." But there was something that was like, maybe I should check my email. And I can tell you, like, literally by checking my email, I saw one thing, and like the whole morning was like now fueled by these thoughts that are going around in my head of like, what's going on? Like, are they gonna deploy us? Is this gonna happen? And I'm like, oh my God, like if I had not checked that, like that would have been a game changer. It would have changed my entire day. So I love that. I love it. So number one, you said patience is a skill. I don't know if that's number 2 or not, Larry, because like you're just giving us a ton of stuff, but a lot of it has to do with like managing your inputs and making sure that you have that morning routine to set your day up for success. Was that number 2, or are you like just giving us some bonus stuff?
I'm just giving you some bonus stuff, but I mean
Okay.
that when I teach patience to him, I mean that could yes, that could be number 2 easily because when I
Mm,
teach patience to a man, I'm like how you start is a good
yeah.
indicator of how you're going to finish and how you're going to interact with the people you love most. So you
Hmm.
better start strong, right? You don't start the 100-meter dash on a really crappy jump, right?
Yeah.
You jump off that block as fast as you possibly can. This is no different. How you start your day is it might determine how you're going to end up and then interact with your family. So yes, start your day off right. Put your oxygen. I'm so tired of hearing this, but put your oxygen mask on first. It's
Yeah.
but it's true.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, you're setting your day up and your interactions with the people that mean most to you
Hmm.
not in the best way possible, even though in the moment, like checking your email, you're like, oh, I should probably just do this real quick because I'll probably be more prepared for the day. Oh, crap. Now I feel like really triggered.
Yep.
So you got to watch that. You got to be very guarded on that kind of stuff.
I love it. I love it. Love it. Thank you for that. All right. So tip number 2, what do you got?
Tip number 2 is I mean there's 6 different things that I teach. But let's talk about the things that I think is most meaningful to parents, right? Because that's
Mhm.
where you really want to go, right?
Yes. Yes.
And husbands and moms and that kind of thing. So I'm really really big on what I like to call transitional periods in your day. Okay.
Okay.
I think of transitional periods in your day of like, okay, I'm going to go out and sprint this race and I'm either going to do it with a warm up or my legs are going to feel like cold logs. Which one do I want? Right.
Hmm.
And of course, we want to warm up. So before you start your workday, you do things, you gear up. Maybe it's a to do list. Maybe it's your vision for the day. Maybe it's what you're celebrating at the end of the day. What am I doing? Like all these things. Well, guess what? When you're a husband and father or a mom, you got to do the same thing because once you shut the doors on your professional life, the doors open for the most important job. And that is, and a lot of us think like, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted. I need to decompress. I need to numb out, go home, drink a couple of beers, sit on the couch, turn on some Netflix. I don't want to interact with people. My kids are annoying me and all that stuff. And trust me, I get it. I mean, my God, I'm there too sometimes. But what you have to do is you have to be prepared for these transitional moments in your day.
Hmm.
I love the book, The Alter Ego Effect by
Yeah.
Todd Herman. It's such a good book because basically what he talks about in that book is he works with professional athletes and celebrities to basically unlock an alter ego to perform better. And I'll give you an example. Bo Jackson, everybody knows who Bo Jackson is. I think he's the only athlete in human history to be in the Hall of Fame for 2 different sports, baseball and football. And if you ask Bo Jackson, like, hey man, what was the secret to your football career? He's like, well, Bo Jackson never played a day of football in his life. And you dig a little deeper, you're like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, every time I put my lid on, right, my hat, my helmet, I was no longer Bo Jackson. I became Jason Voorhees, the Stone Cold Killer. And it didn't matter who was in front of me. I was going to destroy them, and I had no remorse whatsoever. I didn't care if I hurt them. I didn't care if I killed them. They were my enemy, and they were going to hit that field face first and hard, right? And then when I got off
Hmm.
the field, lid comes off, I'm Bo again, right? Well, I liked when I transitioned from dad edge, even though this is my work day, there's still a lot of pouring out that I do, right? There's still a lot of things that are thrown my way, even though I love this work. There's a lot of things that are thrown my way that can be challenging, or maybe it's a client, maybe it's whatever it is. There's challenges. Well, just because I do this work, that doesn't mean that I am flawless in my family. So I need to prepare for that. So I really love visualizations. I grew up watching Mr. Rogers. He's a little bit corny for
Hmm.
me, but my wife also got me into the show This Is Us.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, I guess I'll watch the first episode. And of course I watched the first episode and I watched all 6 seasons because the first episode is Randall, one of the main characters, knocks on his dad's door, who he didn't know his entire life, knocked on his door and said, hey, I just want to let you know I'm your son. And I want to let you know, I want to ask you why you were never part of my life. And it was only
Mm.
that 5 minutes of that episode. And I'm like, okay, I'm hooked.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? Because that was my life.
Yeah.
But Jack Pearson, who's played by, I think, Milo Vermentia, I think that's how you pronounce his name. Don't quote me on that. But Jack Pearson is married to Mandy Moore, who plays Becca. And, Jack is this incredible father, like absolutely freaking incredible. And he's so human and he's so relatable and he screws up but he also does great things. And he's just like this perfect, you know, mixture of an imperfect man who's just trying to be a good dad. And I was like, that's what I want to be like, right? So I have a totem, right? Which is a totem is something that it's something I put on my wrist, right? Yeah, you got it too,
I
right?
got
It
one
could be
too.
anything. Yeah.
Yep.
Your wedding band can be a totem, right? It's a symbol of who you are as a husband or a mom, or I'm sorry, a wife. For me, I have a crucifix bracelet and I have another bracelet that has all my kids' names on it. For me, that's God first, family second. That's my foundation. And when I exit this office and into my kid's life, I'm a mixture of Jack Pearson and Mr. Rogers. And that's how I try to, and am I great with it all the time? No, but that's who I enter in at. That's how I interact with my family, right? Or another, I know this sounds, very high level, but I'm also really into the show The Chosen. And I love how Jonathan Romy, who plays Jesus, just how he does it. He just does it in this super like human yet very like loving way that you just can't help but love the guy, right? Just how he interacts with people. And that's also someone I try to encapsulate. Like when my kids they need love from me or they need hugs. Like I think about like those moments where Jesus would like bring one of the apostles in, like how Jonathan Romy does it in that show and just like hugs people. And I'm like, man, that's just super cool. So those transitional periods are very important. So let me bring this all full circle. Because if I were to get off like a client call, right, where and maybe it was a great call, but maybe I've poured so much in because at the heart of who I am, I'm an introvert and I need to recharge and I'm exhausted and I'm spent. And even though I've done good work and I exit this, and all of a sudden it's mom, dad. Things are blowing up. Things are crazy, right? I get shot in the eyeball with a Nerf gun like I did last night. And you're like, what is going on in here? Right? You know what I mean? But instead I'm like, oh, wow. You guys are excited, so it's that transitional. You've got to do that. And what I do for me is I love to do Wim Hof breathing. I love to put on something that represents I am about ready to exit this life and I'm doing something different now. It's kind of like when you put on your uniform, Mark, as a police officer, you're not Mark Hildebrand, the citizen, you're Mark Hildebrand, the sergeant now. And it's no different. So I like stepping into roles like that. It certainly helps, but you've got to transition. Don't try to sprint that 100 meters without warming up in some way, shape, or how, whether that's meditation, going for a walk, going for a workout, breathing. Maybe it's a totem. Maybe it's an alter ego. Whatever it is, transition though. Don't try to do it cold.
I love that. I love it. I love it. I actually remember the first time that I heard you talk about Todd Herman and the alter ego effect, because for me, it was like a very good realization because, when we go end of watch, we would take off our vest, right? And sometimes I'd take off the vest, but I'd still have the sergeant vest on when I walk through the door. And my kids don't need Sergeant Mark Hildebrand to come home. Trust me, that does not really like mesh together. And when I realized that was kind of like my totem at work, where when I put it on, I would get into this different like kind of persona, kind of different alter ego. Like this is me, it's sergeant time. But when I got home, that's when I would grab my bracelet. So I have two different ones. One says be the coach that people need me to be the real authentic Mark. This one is what I wear like when I'm doing a podcast or when I'm like literally like helping to create modern leaders out in the world. But here's my other one. And it says be the father that Andrew and Alyssa deserves. And it says be the husband that Teresa deserves. And this is when it's time to go into that father and that husband that I want to be. And yes, it's not perfect, but you're so right. Having that transition, I can kind of see now how being at home, sometimes it's even harder, right? Because like literally I come out of to go downstairs and get some water and my kids are like, oh, but dad, I want to share this with you. This is what's happening on my video game and I saw this and this. And I'm like, sometimes I can get a little bit frustrated. I'm like, wait, this is why I came home. I came home so I can spend more time with them. And they're excited about it enough to share it with me. And now I'm just going to like, no, I got to like be a part of this. Like really, like tell me more about that, right? Ask those great generative questions and getting really curious. And then I can go back to do my stuff. But it definitely is that using that transition period. So thank you so much for that, man.
Sure.
Okay, we're winding it up. Tip number 3. What do you got?
Tip number 3 is it's going back to like being a police officer, right? Mark, I have no doubt that you've been trained, your whole professional career to remain vigilant at all times. So it's probably hard for you not to be vigilant in whether you're in uniform or not, right? You're always looking at the exit. You're maybe looking for people's behaviors. You're kind of on the lookout for like what could maybe go wrong here, right?
Yeah.
I don't like to look at things of what maybe could go wrong, but the way I train our guys is be vigilant that something could. Okay. It's kind of like looking for the exit, at any moment in time, your teenage kid could lay on you and say, not lay on you physically, but lay some news on you saying like, Dad, I smoked weed last night for the first time.
Mm.
Okay. And you got to be ready for that stuff, right? Or you got to be prepared for when your kid like comes up and punches you in the nuts, right? Or something like that. If it's a little guy or,
Mhm.
whatever. Um, you've always got to be vigilant that something could be said or done at all times, almost like like a cop, like a police
Mhm.
officer, right? Like that something could go wrong here. And I'm not, again, I want to stress this. Don't look for things to go wrong. Just be vigilant that something could. That's all. Because if you're looking for wrong things, I don't like to do that because then you're looking through the lens of like paranoia and bad things, right? I
Mhm.
like to look through the lens of appreciation. But when things do go wrong, you're ready for it, right? You're not like hit blindly by it. And the other thing too is I love creating space, right, between reaction and response.
Mhm.
So, like for instance, if my kids are acting crazy, which I've got two little ones, a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, dude, there isn't a night that's not crazy. Mark, they're all crazy. It's crazy in here, right? So I've got to be ready for that, right?
Mhm.
So what I usually do is when craziness is going, is ensuing around me, you'll see me sometimes, not always. Again, my batting average is 7 out of 10. It's not perfect, but you'll see me most of the time like it's going crazy. And guess what? Inside my mind, I'm about ready to explode. I really
Mhm.
am, right? There's nothing wrong with like feeling the urge to be like, I am going to get very angry right now.
Mhm.
But instead, I'm like, hang on. And I'll take a breath. And usually, here's what I coach men. This sounds insanely simple, but I like to keep things simple. If you try to wiggle your left thumb and your right pinky toe, it's insanely hard. But guess what? That'll buy you 4 seconds before you explode. And it'll
Yeah.
buy you just enough time to be like, "Oh, okay, yeah. Hey, it looks like you're upset, man." Like,
Mhm.
that's how I'll talk to my kid versus like, "What is your problem? What is
Mhm.
wrong with you?" Right? Which I did in the past week too. I did that too, which I'll get to that last bonus one here in a minute.
Mhm.
But that's one thing, right? Or count backwards by threes from 50 to 0. Try that one. That one's
Mhm.
tough. Basically, what you're trying to do is buy yourself 5 to 7 seconds of breathing
Mhm.
room before you respond. When you do that, you create enough space that you're not going to completely and totally react. And usually, what I like to do, the way I coach men, is label what you think is going on for the people around you. So if your kid is like pissed, throwing a temper tantrum, or whatever, instead of being like, "What is wrong with you? Why are you so upset? I don't understand this." You could be like, "Oh, looks like you're really upset."
Mhm.
Just label it for what you see, and that's it. Just let that label land and just let it do its work, and let that label calm that kid down. Be like, "I am upset." Yeah, it looks like you are. What's going on, man? Right. And then you've bought yourself enough time where you haven't done something you regret.
Mhm.
So I like doing that. Buy yourself a little bit of time in between reaction and response, whether that's counting backwards. Sometimes too, I like to name things in the room quietly to myself. Be like, there's a computer, there's a mixer, microwave, there's a microphone, there's a candle. And that again buys me enough time. Even if I just look around the room for 5 seconds and just name things quietly, it buys me enough time. So that's again, it's a tactical skill. It's no different than, I don't even know what you guys do, but when you pull people over, I think you have to have like
Yep.
your firearm on the opposite side of wherever you're at.
Yep.
It's things like that you have to be aware of, right?
100%. The approach that you take
Yeah.
on the car, being out of the mirrors, making sure that their lights
Yeah.
are impacting people so they can't see and look behind them. I mean, there's so many different things that are going on, right? But you're right.
Yeah.
That is those are such like important skills. And I remember when you actually taught this once again that that space between stimulus and response, right? And the life coach in me like understands how this works because when we react to what's going on, our subconscious mind or whatever, it just kind of like blurts out of us and we actually can't take charge of it with our prefrontal cortex. Like we can't slow down and go, wait, should I say this? Should I do this? What's the repercussions of this? What's going to
Right.
happen if I say this? And
Yeah.
giving yourself that time now brings it to your conscious mind. It's the same reason why like meal prepping works. Because if you're in the moment and you're like, oh, should I grab this or this? You're going to make a bad decision. But if a
Totally.
day before you're like, let me plan my meals, let me make my meals, and then you prep for it. So when it does happen, it's so much easier because you've already made that decision. It's come from your prefrontal cortex. So I love that, man. I love that. So you said there's going to be a bonus tip, and I do want to talk about psychological safety at the
Yeah.
towards the end. That might be your
Yeah.
bonus tip. But that is something that I think is so critical, especially with becoming angry, because sometimes we teach our kids not to bring us the things that are going wrong in their life, not to
Right.
bring us the things, the mistakes that they make because of the way that we react and we respond to them.
Yeah.
And that is such a game changer that when you taught me that, it totally flipped the switch for me. But hit me up with a bonus first.
Yeah, the bonus is just this. It's very simple. One of the things that I teach, and again, we got an online course on this, but
Hmm.
it's an after action review. You're gonna screw up, right?
Hmm.
Like it's Tuesday. You and I are on this. I screwed up Sunday, and it was one of those things where I was trying to urgently get my 15-year-old up for church, and he wasn't doing it. And my wife was getting pissed. I was getting pissed. Well, then I had like 10 dominoes fall that day, and I just kept getting it. And here's the other thing too. And I told my wife this. I was like, I was so disappointed in myself because I was so crabby and I was so curt, and I wasn't fun to be around. And the thing that I kept telling myself is the exact same thing that I teach all the time, which is that don't shame, blame, and pain yourself when you are having a bad moment, because that's exactly what I was doing. I was like, God bless. No one is losing a limb. Nothing is serious. No one's got
Hmm.
a health crisis. This is all fixable stuff. And yet I'm getting so mad. What is wrong with me? Like I might
Hmm.
as well just open up my arm and pour salt in the wound, right? Because that's what I was
Hmm.
doing. But I think if you zoom out, right, and just look at what's happening, right? Because when you do screw up, you have to zoom out from that situation and be like, all right, what exactly happened here? And what did I learn from it? What's avoidable from the future? And I sat at dinner with my kids, and I literally, I looked at everybody. Everybody was quiet. It was just one of those days where I was just
Hmm.
setting the tone for the family. I go, guys, I am so sorry about today. And even my two little ones say, it's okay. And my wife and my older kids were like, yeah, what happened today? What is wrong with you today? And I was like, yeah. And I just told them everything that I just told you. I was like, I just couldn't get my footing
Hmm.
underneath me. And I just kept getting more and more frustrated. And I just kept getting more frustrated with myself. And in turn, I was getting more frustrated with you. And my oldest asked me a beautiful question. He's like, well, what can you do to avoid that in the future? I was like, I need to ask myself that question way earlier in the
Yeah.
process than right now.
Yeah.
And when you do an after action review of like, okay, had I done this all over again, what would have done? I probably would have
Hmm.
been like, guys, dad needs to go on a 10-minute walk. I just need to clear my head. I will be right back. And one thing I can promise you is when I get back, I will be much better.
Yeah.
I should have done that. I didn't do that. So lesson learned, after action review.
I love it. I love it. I love it. But I even love that your 15-year-old asked you that powerful question. Sometimes we don't even realize that we're teaching
Yeah.
our kids by literally going out there and like learning this stuff for ourselves and then
Yeah.
practicing it is the same thing. I remember having a conversation during dinner, and I always use the, hey, what made you smile today? Like that's just something.
Yeah.
And I'm just sitting there like we're just having a conversation, and my wife goes, hey, like guys, what was something that happened at school today that just was like super funny? And I'm like, what the hell? Like she's stealing my lines, right? But at the same time, I'm like, this is powerful because like it's just us taking action and then our family going, hey, I love that. Let me use that, into the future. And it's just so
Yeah.
awesome when you realize that you're kind of like making that kind of impact. Um, Okay, so I want to end with
Sure.
psychological safety because this was a game changer for me when I didn't realize that when my kids were bringing me things where there are maybe small things right now that I could literally set them up for in the future when the big things happen, they could bring them to me, or based off of my response, I could actually get them to not take the actions that they want to take, not
Yeah.
come up and tell me, not have that conversation. So can you kind of describe that really quickly?
Yeah, I would venture to say you're probably amazing at this, right? Because you have to be for your job in order to get somebody who has done something wrong to admit that they've done something wrong,
Hmm.
right? And I'm sure you've had
Yeah,
people confess, right?
yeah.
You've got to provide an environment where they feel safe to do it, right? They
Hmm.
feel comfortable now. The guard has come down. Psychological safety with our family is really, really no different. Psychological safety, and that's more of an academic term. A lot of people are like, what does that even mean? Well, here's what it means. You have probably been told at some point in your life, I don't know what it is about you, Mark, but I feel like I can tell you anything.
Mm.
And that just goes to show maybe in that moment, or maybe it's just part of who you are. You provide people with an environment of psychological safety where they can tell you something, because here's what it is. It's an environment where I can share anything with you, Mark, or anybody else I feel safe with. I'm going to tell you something, and I know it's going to be received without blame, shame, pain, or guilt, right? Those
Mm.
things, because all of us, like, we can all recall a time when we were talking to our parents growing up. We say something, met with like, are you freaking kidding me right now? What the hell's wrong with you? Do you understand what's going to happen if you do this, this, or this? What were you thinking? And
Mm.
what you're basically being like is, okay, well, I just made a mental note not to tell you anything. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. That's not what I'm after as a father. That's not what I like to think most people are after as a parent. So again, like with patients, you've got to be very vigilant that anything can be shared with you at any moment, right? And you got to keep those that environment free from blame, shame, pain, and guilt, and that kind of thing. Now, I'm not saying it's the absence of discipline. I'm not saying that at all.
Hmm.
But what I am saying is your response needs to be that. So here's how you can do it, right? You can either manufacture this like proactively, or you can just be ready for it. But here's what I like to do. It's best if I kind of share this in story form, right? So if I ask one of the ways I love to manufacture psychological safety is through a generative question like, "Hey, tell me something you failed at today."
Hmm.
Now, I am basically opening up the floodgates for anything that my kid is going to tell me, right?
Hmm.
And I've got to be ready for it. And I've got to be ready to meet him where he's at and to make sure that the welcome mat and the doorway is always wide open for him to come back and share it, because he's gonna take note of like, well, how dad reacts to this is whether or not I'm gonna tell him anything anymore.
Hmm.
So this is what it might sound like. My son might be like, yeah, that science test, dad, that I studied for? I was like, yeah. And in my mind, I'm like, the one I know you didn't study for, because I was constantly reminding you to be off your phone and you were talking to your girlfriend. I kept telling you, hey, man, you better study. That's what's going through my mind. I'd be like, yeah, I remember that one. Yeah, I got a D on that. Now, part of me is like, I told you to study for that. Didn't I tell you to study for that? What's wrong? Come on, man. I'm not going to do that though. I'll be like, oh, okay. Tell me more. What's going on? Tell me more about that. And I don't like to say, why did that happen?
Yeah.
Because then that's accusatory. I like to say, tell me more, because that's inviting.
Hmm.
It's an invite. Like, yeah, I got a D on that test, and I thought I was prepared for it, and I wasn't. And so I'll whatever he says, I'll dig deeper. Be like, so it sounds like you thought you were prepared for it, but you weren't. And then so I mirror him. I use his
Hmm.
words. He comes back and he's like, yeah, I studied chapters 1, 2, and 3. I really didn't study 4, 5, and 6, as well as I should have. And a lot of the questions were 4, 5, and 6. I'm like, oh, well, and then I'll be like, you know what? Number one, it's probably taken a lot of courage for you to tell me this. So I really want to honor you for that. So I honor them for their courage.
Hmm.
I was like, but let me ask you this. I was like, I think this is great awareness, and I think it's a great lesson. So look, if you had this to do all over again, get
Hmm.
prepared for this science test, what would you do different? Well, I'd study a little more, probably wouldn't be on my phone, and I definitely wouldn't have slacked off with 4, 5, and 6. I would have studied. I'm like, man, that's really great that you know that. Well, when's your next test? Be like, well, I've got one in 2 weeks. Okay, great. Well, based on the information that you learned from this experience, what would you do different? And then they lay out the plan. I don't have to
Hmm.
lecture. I don't have to scold. I don't have to shame or blame or leverage guilt. He's laying out the plan.
Hmm.
And I'd be like, man, that's a great idea. How can I support you? Do you need me to check in with you, hold you accountable, quiz you? What can I do to help you out? And
Hmm.
then they'll tell me. And then I'll tell them at the end, I'll be like, you know what? I'm really glad you told me that. That probably wasn't easy. I remember growing up, I would dread conversations like this, but I think you learned a lot with this. And I think you got a great plan for the next time this happens. And I just reinforce, I'm like, let me just be honest with you. When you go out and find a job or start a business, no one's going to ask what you got in your biology midterm. I was like, but they are going to wonder how you fix people's problems and how you make things right and better. And what you
Hmm.
just did is made things right and better for the next time. So good job.
Hmm.
So that's how I create psychological safety, because now that kid walks away with like, man, that was cool. Like, dad just wasn't my dad, but he kind of guided me and he didn't really lecture me. And I came up with the plan.
Hmm.
So that's what we walk with.
I love it. I love it. And I remember you making this statement like when your kid goes through something, you want them to think, "Man, I just went through that. I need to call my dad."
Yes,
Versus, "I just went through this. My dad can't find out." And
exactly.
I love that we're all about like creating that kind of environment. By just asking questions. I mean, that's literally what we do here at Modern Leadership is about asking powerful questions to get people to come to their conclusions. Because when you have their buy-in and they're like, hey, this is my plan. And like you said, how can I best support you with this? It's their plan. And when it's their plan, they're like, I'm willing to do this, not necessarily what dad or what mom tells me what to do. And you get to empower kids like that, right? when you're like, hey, what would you do in this situation? I like to ask my kids that too. Like if I messed up, I would say, hey, what would you have done? And you'd be amazed what kids can teach us. It's like,
Oh my
holy
gosh.
smokes.
Dude, most of the time, what I have found, I was just on another podcast talking about this. I would say 90% of the time when I ask, like, especially with my kids, when I ask them, what would you do different? Because I don't, I think asking my kid, well, what's your plan for the next one?
Yeah.
I think that ensues that more like that guilt and shame.
Yep.
But when you ask, what would you do different
Hmm.
based on the information that you have and the beautiful things you've learned? That's a much different welcoming way for them to articulate it. And here's the beautiful thing. Whatever it is that their plan that lays out, what I thought in my head is like, I'm just going to bestow all my knowledge onto them and they're going to be so gracious and it's just going to be beautiful. And normally I walk away from conversations like that and their plan, I'm like, oh, I'm really glad their idea was way better than mine.
Yes. 100%. 100%. I feel the same exact way, especially with my daughter. She can literally tell me something. It'll like do a complete 180 in my business, and she's 12 years old. But I'm like,
Right?
that is freaking genius how you came up with that. Well, Larry, holy smokes. Okay, so 30 minutes turned into 50 minutes. And dude, I appreciate you so much for imparting your wisdom here today. I'm sure there's going to be some people who want to like lean into maybe your patience master class, maybe learn about the Dad Edge Alliance, which I heard is like going to be temporarily. You're not going to take any more people, so that's going to be something that people are going to want to rush to do. So how can people best connect with you if they want to learn a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah, so I like to meet everybody with wherever they're at with their journey. So like you can find everything we're doing over at thedadedge.com. If you look on our resources tab, I've got a few free resources and a few free trainings if you just want to kind of taste of what we do. If you're kind of at the journey that I was after I spanked my son, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go all in. I don't want anything free. Give me a coach, give me a mentor. Like I need to learn, right? The alliance might be for you. Just go to thedadedge.com/alliance. That's our group coaching and mastermind. And yes, we are going to be closing the doors. I think it's going to probably be March 1st. It's going to just be temporary. I don't know how long it's going to be, but what we're doing just operationally, we're just going to be cleaning some things up, securing people on call teams for permanent basis and that kind of thing. And we just want to kind of take a time out from taking on new people. I don't know how long it's going to be. It could be a good amount of time. It could be short. I don't know. Depends on how long it takes us to really dial some things in there. But that's the two easiest ways to connect.
Awesome. Awesome. And everybody make sure that you subscribe to the Dad Edge podcast. It's one of the best podcasts on the planet. So here's the thing, guys. You're probably, now that you have an idea of like how to really tackle patience, how it's like a skill that you get to develop every day. And it's not the days that go perfect that you have the best opportunity to develop them. It's the days where you have the least amount of patience, where you get the most frustrated. That actually is your greatest opportunity to learn and develop new skills. So instead of being afraid of us, lean in. Now, I do have to say, a lot of this has to also do with self-sabotage. You can like literally be creating this over and over and over again because there's things that have happened in the past, whether it's emotional experiences or things that you've gone through that are basically your version of self-sabotage is, I don't want the person to get too close, so let me see what I can do to kind of push them away. Now, you don't think about this logically, but that's okay because I got you covered. I have another workshop that I'm going to put up here at the end of this video so you guys can jump right into how to end self-sabotage for good. Larry, man, I appreciate you so much for giving your time and your energy here, dude. And I just want to appreciate you not only for what you did here today, but also what you've done for me, what you've done for my marriage, my relationships, my business, all those kind of things. It would not have been possible without you, man. So I appreciate you so much for being here.
Appreciate you back, man. I love the work you're doing. And I always just love your energy, man. For all you guys listening to Mark's show, make sure you go support him. Make sure you keep listening in. Like obviously, Mark is contagious. People, I'm a fan. You gotta love Mark. You gotta love his energy. So thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. All right, modern leaders, take what you've learned today, go out, put it out into the world, and keep leading from the front. See you guys.